when we moved to Irvington, we had become a family in a large house of 6 people. And one of those persons was my grandmother, who lived with us all of the time I was growing up, and she was alive. And then there was my mother and my father and the 3 of us children. And that's all the children our family had. I was the oldest and was born in 1934. My brother was born in 1938, and my sister was born in 1941. By the time we moved to Irvington, the World War II had been going on a couple of hours.
Hours?
I mean, a couple of years, excuse me, had been going on a couple of years. And my father was too old to be drafted. So he at one point worked for the Allison's Motor company that made airplane motors and equipment for...
So your father did do war work.
He did do... Ooh, there's a big bird. Who did do... Yes, who did do work in the factories. I had 2 uncles who actually ended up in World War II. One never made it out of the country. The other one went to England to become an informations officer.
Well, which uncles were these?
This was Jimmy Simmons, who married my Aunt Isabel, and Don Wendling, who married my Aunt Helen.
Now, didn't you have uncles and aunts on your father's side? Uncles and aunts on your father's side?
None of them, they were a little bit older.
Yeah, but who were they?
Oh dear. You caught me off guard because I didn't know them as well.
Really? Why not?
Well, first of all, my mother and her sisters had been together for many years, and they depended on each other greatly. The other side of the family, the aunts and uncles were older, and we weren't as close to them. And my mother's family tended to congregate in Irvington.
Right.
They were used to being together, and so they did seek out the company of each other. The others, not so much. Although both my Applegate side of the family, which is what that would be, they had a large family too, but I never knew them as well. So anyway, we're in Irvington, and war is on. My mother did not work outside of the home. My father didn't approve of it. And she was at home with us when we were young. I observed her daily activities.
Right, you've been over that.
And we've already talked about that. But she was always busy, and in the house or out in the yard or doing the sewing, which she began to take on and do a great deal of most of her life.
Right.
So she made a number of my clothes that I wore to high school, and I went to a high school called Howe High School.
Right.
And it was named after an educator named Thomas Carr Howe, who was supposed to be rather progressive in his ideas about education. And Irvington itself was a progressive area. There were a number of churches there of various kinds. Most people attended churches. most people participated in the community whenever they could.
Right. You've been over this.
And so then, while I was at Howe High School, I became very interested in education, because Indianapolis at that time was serious about education. And I began to take all the English courses I could.
And this was in high school.
This was in high school. But probably what shaped me the most, besides my teachers, was the fact that I got to be editor of the school paper for a year. And the teacher who was in charge of us was also very interested in words and helping us craft them in the proper way.
Right.
One thing he would not allow much of in the high school newspaper was stories about who was going steady with whom.
So it was not gossip.
No,
it was
it was not a kind of a gossipy thing. He wanted it to be serious, and we learned about the who, what, why, when, and how of journalism.
which they don't do much anymore.
Well, it doesn't appear as if they do, but he broke it down and asked us to follow those journalistic rules. And I was on the editorial board, so occasionally I would get to write an editorial that was, rather sensible. And I also got to write little stories for one of the Indianapolis papers that would occasionally appear in them. You know, they were simple stories about what was going on at the high school, but not about the...
So you actually had articles, small articles in the Indianapolis paper.
Right, but they were serious articles. Now, some of my friends at Howe were a little more interested in being beauty queens. And they would get to be the beauty queens for homecoming.
Right.
Or something like that. But I was never part of that crowd. I was in a club, though, called the Bows. I don't know if you've ever heard of the song
Buttons and Bows.
Buttons and Bows.
Yeah, I believe that was a Cole Porter tune.
Oh, well, that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Cole Porter was a Hoosier. And we picked up on that and called ourselves the Bows, and we met together, but we all were sort of serious students. And I took 4 years of English, which meant that I was preparing myself to go to college. I knew that. And so that was, and I became the first grandchild, since I was the oldest grandchild on the Stoll side. I was the first grandchild to go to college. And when I went to Indiana University in Bloomington, and when I graduated, my grandmother insisted on being there at the graduation to see me be the first one in the family to graduate. So what I learned in Irvington was not then part of Indianapolis. It was an addition that Quakers had founded, and they had definite ideas about how they wanted to have a community. And so I guess I've always expected communities to have some kind of sensible plan that made it possible for everybody to become what they might want to be. My father did not even finish. He went through the 8th grade only. So, but he became very interested in automobiles.
Right.
And eventually, what made it possible for us to go to Irvington was that he was running a gasoline station and making it. And my mother was keeping the books, and they had to keep track not only of the money but of the ration stamps, which were so common during World War II. And not,
They didn't sell tires, did they?
I don't remember. They could certainly make an order for tires, but I don't think they kept them, handy.
Well, I ask because those were rationed as well.
Probably, yes. Anything which was being used in what we call the war effort,
Right.
could be rationed or not easy to get. And not only were tires not easy to get, steak was not easy to get.
Nope.
Because
Right.
those things went to the military. And when the war was over, I remember when they started talking about steaks will be more readily available again, I said to my mother, I don't think I've ever had a real steak. We were more apt to have hamburger or the kinds of dishes that my grandmother brought with her from Austria, like sauerkraut and simple foods. She would make sauerkraut sandwiches and feel that she had something special. Our food was simple, and my mother often grew some of it in her garden and then canned it,
Yeah, I think you mentioned that before.
and then it was kept in the basement and given out to people as
Right.
gifts
Yeah.
from time to time.
But not when you were in Irvington because you didn't have the... At Irvington you did that?
Mhm. Yes, right.
But you didn't have... In Irvington you didn't have the poor people living in the alley next to you, right?
No, that was on the other side of town.
Right.
And the important thing about Irvington, too, was I got to be close to my cousins. And the cousin born just after I was born was named Charles Russell. And we were close all of our lives. And we would often ride our bicycles to Ellenberger Park and walk along the creek bed. And he later, I think that's probably why he later became a biology teacher,
Oh.
because he got interested in...
Is this Buck?
This was Buck.
Okay.
Yes, he ended up being called Buck. And he was interested in biology and took it all very seriously. He never married, so he was always, first of all, a teacher, and secondly, he learned how to play the piano and ride bicycles with me. But as you can see, and we went to the Methodist Church, and the Methodist Church was one of the more liberal churches in Irvington, and one of our ministers let us dance in the church on Sunday night, us teenagers,
Right.
because he wanted us to feel comfortable there. Now, not everybody in the church thought that was appropriate, but our group was very popular. But other teenage groups in the area were also actively involved in the teenagers' world. And most of us went to a church group